Chapter 5 of the Montessori Method. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Leon Meyer. The Montessori Method by Maria Montessori. Translated by Anne E. George. Chapter 5. Discipline. The pedagogical method of observation has for its base the liberty of the child, and liberty is activity. Discipline must come through liberty. Here is a great principle which is difficult for the followers of common school methods to understand. How shall one obtain discipline in a class of free children? Certainly, in our system, we have a concept of discipline very different from that commonly accepted. If discipline is founded upon liberty, the discipline itself must necessarily be active. We do not consider an individual disciplined only when he has been rendered as artificially silent as a mute and as immovable as a paralytic. He is an individual annihilated, not disciplined. We call an individual disciplined when he is master of himself, and can, therefore, regulate his own conduct when it shall be necessary to follow some rule of life. Such a concept of active discipline is not easy to comprehend or to apply, but certainly it contains a great educational principle, very different from the old-time absolute and undiscussed coercion to immobility. A special technique is necessary to the teacher who is to lead the child along such a path of discipline, if she is to make it possible for him to continue in this way all his life, advancing indefinitely toward perfect self-mastery. Since the child now learns to move rather than to sit still, he prepares himself not for the school, but for life, for he becomes able, through habit and through practice, to perform easily and correctly the simple acts of social or community life. The discipline to which the child habituates himself here is, in its character, not limited to the school environment, but extends to society. The liberty of the child should have as its limit the collective interest, as its form what we universally consider good breeding. We must, therefore, check in the child whatever offends or annoys others, or whatever tends toward rough or ill-bred acts. But all the rest, every manifestation having useful scope, whatever it be, and under whatever form it expresses itself, must not only be permitted, but must be observed by the teacher. Here lies the essential point. From her scientific preparation, the teacher must bring not only the capacity, but the desire to observe natural phenomena. In our system, she must become a passive, much more than an active influence, and her passivity shall be composed of anxious scientific curiosity, and of absolute respect for the phenomenon which she wishes to observe. The teacher must understand and feel her position of observer. The activity must lie in the phenomenon. Such principles assuredly have a place in schools for little children who are exhibiting the first psychic manifestations of their lives. We cannot know the consequences of suffocating a spontaneous action at the time when the child is just beginning to be active. Perhaps we suffocate life itself. Humanity shows itself in all its intellectual splendor during this tender age, as the sun shows itself at the dawn, and the flower in the first unfolding of the petals, and we must respect, religiously, reverently, these first indications of individuality. If any educational act is to be efficacious, it will be only that which tends to help toward the complete unfolding of this life. To be thus helpful, it is necessary rigorously to avoid the arrest of spontaneous movements and the imposition of arbitrary tasks. It is of course understood that here we do not speak of useless or dangerous acts, for these must be suppressed, destroyed. Actual training and practice are necessary to fit for this method teachers who have not been prepared for scientific observation, and such training is especially necessary to those who have been accustomed to the old domineering methods of the common school. My experiences in training teachers for the work in my schools did much to convince me of the great distance between these methods and those. Even an intelligent teacher who understands the principle finds much difficulty in putting it into practice. She cannot understand that her new task is apparently passive, like that of the astronomer who sits immovable before the telescope while the worlds whirl through space. This idea that life acts of itself, and that in order to study it, to divine its secrets or to direct its activity, it is necessary to observe it and to understand it without intervening, this idea, I say, is very difficult for anyone to assimilate and to put into practice. The teacher has too thoroughly learned to be the one free activity of the school. It has for too long been virtually her duty to suffocate the activity of her pupils. When in the first days, in one of the "children's houses," she does not obtain order and silence, she looks about her embarrassed, as if asking the public to excuse her, and calling upon those present to testify her innocence. In vain do we repeat to her that the disorder of the first moment is necessary. And finally, when we oblige her to do nothing but watch, she asks if she had not better resign, since she is no longer a teacher. But when she begins to find it her duty to discern which are the acts to hinder and which are those to observe, the teacher of the old school feels a great void within herself, and begins to ask if she will not be inferior to her new task. In fact, she who is not prepared finds herself for a long time abashed and impotent, whereas the broader the teacher's scientific culture and practice in experimental psychology, the sooner will come for her the marvel of unfolding life, and her interest in it. Notari, in his novel My Millionaire Uncle, which is a criticism of modern customs, gives, with that quality of vividness which is peculiar to him, a most eloquent example of the old-time methods of discipline. The uncle, when a child, was guilty of such a number of disorderly acts that he practically upset the whole town, and in desperation he was confined in a school. Here Fufu, as he was called, experiences his first wish to be kind, and feels the first moving of his soul when he is near to the pretty little Fufetta, and learns that she is hungry and has no luncheon. He glanced around, looked at Fufetta, rose, took his little lunch basket, and without saying a word placed it in her lap. Then he ran away from her, and, without knowing why he did so, hung his head and burst into tears. My uncle did not know how to explain to himself the reason for this sudden outburst. He had seen for the first time two kind eyes full of sad tears, and he had felt moved within himself, and at the same time a great shame had rushed over him, the shame of eating near to one who had nothing to eat. Not knowing how to express the impulse of his heart, nor what to say in asking her to accept the offer of his little basket, nor how to invent an excuse to justify his offering it to her, he remained the victim of this first deep movement of his little soul. Fufetta, all confused, ran to him quickly. With great gentleness she drew away the arm in which he had hidden his face. "Do not cry, Fufu," she said to him softly, almost as if pleading with him. She might have been speaking to her beloved rag doll, so motherly and intent was her little face, and so full of gentle authority her manner. Then the little girl kissed him, and my uncle, yielding to the influence which had filled his heart, put his arms around her neck, and, still silent and sobbing, kissed her in return. At last, sighing deeply, he wiped from his face and eyes the damp traces of his emotion, and smiled again. A strident voice called out from the other end of the courtyard, "Here, here, you two down there! Be quick with you! Inside, both of you!" It was the teacher, the guardian. She crushed that first gentle stirring in the soul of a rebel, with the same blind brutality that she would have used toward two children engaged in a fight. It was the time for all to go back into the school, and everybody had to obey the rule. Thus I saw my teachers act, in the first days of my practice school in the "Children's Houses." They almost involuntarily recalled the children to immobility without observing and distinguishing the nature of the movements they repressed. There was, for example, a little girl who gathered her companions about her and then in the midst of them